Humans are part of larger systems that span space-time on a different and incomprehensible scale. We live in communities and societies on a planet as part of a greater coagulation of elemental particles. Though we participate in infinite relationships with other objects, we can only discern or visualize these interactions through commutative perception. Our reality is full of hyperobjects, or as Timothy Morton describes them, things that are massively distributed in time and space relative to humans. This loose definition can be construed to encompass tangible and intangible objects, collections of objects, ideas, relationships, and the effects of individual choices. Complex ecosystems, planetary nutrient and energy flows, and the solar system are hyperobjects of biological origin. Humans also create and sustain hyperobjects such as atmospheric pollution, plastic and other compounds resistant to decay, megastructures like offshore oil rigs, and human society as a whole. Due to their complexity and interwoven nature, hyperobjects have become the object of my fascination. I believe hyperobjects to be the intellectual tool that we can use to understand the universe. The hyperobject we call Earth is a delicate composition of interwoven fabrics, themselves the detailed stories of particles, molecules, cells, organisms, populations, communities, and ecosystems. Humans exist within these fabrics and are, ecologically speaking, fundamentally defined by the chemical and energy conversions occurring around us and inside us. We are therefore resultant of trophic hyperobjects, or the consumptive relationships facilitating our accumulation of matter. Part of being a human is to be heterotrophic. We do not create our own energy like plants and other autotrophs, nor do we secrete useful materials of construction like spiders. Instead, we have developed modern, industrialized, and global economies that are based upon extraction. We rely upon extraction. Although this is our natural instinct, we have the opportunity to respond to obvious indications of over-extraction by creating eco-architectures modeled after the complexities and intricately woven trophic relationships of a global whole. While I believe that humans should modulate our heterotrophic nature away from finite resources, I do not suppose that extraction is fundamentally inconsistent with a healthy living planet. I also do not believe that there is anything wrong with humans participating in complex, global material and energy flows. We are already part of this world and part of the problems and solutions therein. We cannot escape the hyperobjects that existed before us, those that will exist after us, and we certainly cannot escape the hyperobjects we have created. We are capable of using our collective knowledge to devise sophisticated biological and architectural systems that can address some of the biggest issues facing human society today. The ultimate goal of this architecture is to reinforce the bond between the biological systems of Earth and human society, including culture, economy, and wellness. To achieve this goal, I have chosen two time-sensitive and emotional problems to focus on. One, climate change due to greenhouse gas emission, and two, oceanic plastic pollution. As a trial solution, I propose creating a megastructure that sequesters carbon and accumulates plastic pollution while facilitating global systems research. Humans shepherd these processes through their occupation of the architecture, which is the hyperobject at the center of other hyperobjects. If this intervention is a success, the goal is to proliferate these megastructures throughout the open ocean. Collectively, these hyperobjects have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere and reduce plastic particulate in the open ocean. This project will also build an infrastructure of oceanic hubs for future scientific research, observation, and exploration. On Earth, life is prolific and it is everywhere. The sun is the ultimate origin of energy, but once electromagnetic radiation reaches Earth, the energy is circulated in the nutrient cycles of a living planet before being re-radiated back into space. Organisms participate in this circle of life, but they also live within and depend upon global nutrient and energy circulation. We refer to some of these hyperobject fluid dynamic systems as weather and oceanic currents. Surface currents in the ocean are typically affected by global wind currents, which are caused by the sun and its unequal heating of the atmosphere. They are also affected by a feedback loop called the saline pump, a natural disruption in oceanic stratification caused by the formation of ice crystals in the Arctic regions of the ocean. Therefore, greenhouse gas emissions have the propensity to disrupt these vital nutrient and energy flows due to the observed reduction of sea ice formation. If the sea ice does not form, the global nutrient and energy supply chains we rely upon could stop, unraveling every ecosystem on the planet. It is clear from the geological record that Earth has experienced dramatic warming and cooling events in the past. One hypothesis for how the planet responds to and mitigates an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations is the proliferation of plants and other photosynthesizing organisms. The net absorption of carbon dioxide and release of oxygen caused by larger populations of autotrophs can, collectively, alter the composition of the atmosphere and the ocean. The compositions of the atmosphere and hydrosphere are in dynamic equilibrium due to the continuous interface they share. This means that an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere puts positive pressure on the ocean to absorb more. Additionally, due to the relative vastness of the ocean, it is a massive carbon sink, with the capacity to naturally store unmeasured amounts of carbon in the lower or benthic regions. The natural process by which this occurs is called the biological pump, a hyperobject of biological origin. Natural processes in the surface waters of the ocean eventually result in the death and decay of organisms. This matter rains down on the sublayers of the ocean as marine snow, eventually coming to rest upon the abyssal plain, a stratified layer of organic matter a mile thick at the bottom of the ocean. Since the benthic waters of the ocean are very rarely brought to the surface, the net result of this natural process is a mass movement of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to the bottom of the ocean. The first main goal of this architecture is to mimic the biological pump. This is accomplished by growing mats of sargassum kelp, allowing them to decompose anaerobically within the structure, and depositing the resulting organic matter into the benthic region. As the kelp deteriorates, biogas is siphoned off the digestate for export, providing an economic solution to the potential problem of off-gassing methane. The corrals in which the kelp is grown form boundaries to two controlled environments. Kelp is kept separate from the floating garbage found in the surface waters of the ocean. As the mat expands from its seeding origin, the more mature kelp is fed into a mechanical digestion chamber. The organic matter is then processed within the structure and deposited into the anaerobic digestion chamber. It is retained for 20 days before being deposited from a tube at the base of the structure, where this artificial marine snow commingles with naturally formed detritus on its way to the abyssal plain. This process is managed to be continuous, with the constant addition of new organic matter replacing that which decomposes. The biological pump is also managed to be separate but concurrent to the plastic cleanup effort. Plastic is a hyperobject of human creation. It is persistent in soils and water, the organisms living in those media, and thus in our bodies as well. With up to 60% of plastic produced being less dense than water, the surface of the ocean has become a plastic sink. This is an obvious ecological crisis as the garbage patches of the world swell to the size of continents. Ocean currents are responsible for the movement and aggregation of energy, nutrients, life forms, and, yes, pollution too. Since its synthesis in the early 20th century, plastic garbage and particulate has coagulated in these surface currents, specifically in the centers of oceanic gyres. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, another hyperobject, has gained notoriety in recent years as one of the largest of such collections of plastic, stretching from the continental shelf off the coast of California to the islands of Hawaii. With concentrations exceeding 100 kilograms per square kilometer, this floating island of plastic continues to grow, harming larger animals like whales, fish, and turtles, while poisoning the ocean with smaller particulate. Therefore, the second main goal of this architecture is to begin to mitigate the environmental disaster right on our doorstep. The site chosen for the first megastructure is the 2,700-foot water column above an unnamed seamount within the Murray Fracture Zone. This location is considered ideal due to its warm surface waters and the relative ease of attaching tension cables to the top of a seamount compared to the abyssal plain miles below. Additionally, the natural upwelling on the prevailing current side of the seamount provides vital nutrients for kelp production, while the natural downwelling on the leeward side carries released digestate into the ocean's abyssal depths more quickly. The intervention uses a large comb oriented toward the prevailing upwelling current to slow the current's velocity, allowing submerged objects and particulate to rise in the water column. A bubble barrier pushes the buoyant plastic above the edge of the collection hopper and prevents it from escaping. Once gathered, the garbage is pumped into the belly of the structure, where it is mechanically reduced to manageable sizes and sorted with sieves. The larger aggregates are inspected for degradation, and the highest quality plastic is exported for reuse in the global marketplace. This requires the aggregates to be packaged and loaded into shipping containers, which are carried up a chute from the sorting area to the industrial loading dock. Marine cranes then transfer the shipping containers to the awaiting cargo ship. Smaller aggregates that cannot be exported are mixed into a concrete slurry on the construction barge. According to researchers at MIT, gamma-irradiated plastic can partially replace Portland cement in the formation of concrete and improve its compressive strength. Its chemical bonds also ensure that the plastic particulate will not seep back into the ocean. Finally, the smallest particulate, which remains in suspension, cannot be used for anything. It is a toxic substance. The best way to decontaminate the ocean water is to harness the capacity of Ideonella bacteria to consume polyethylene titrate, the most common plastic compound, before releasing the cleansed water back into the ocean. This process takes place inside of buoyant concrete containers built on site from the irradiated plasticrete. After they are constructed and filled with wastewater, these vessels are connected together. The hexagonal shape of the containers allows them to be integrated into a moment frame, which is connected to the industrial zones below deck by a structural spine. These semi-submersible concrete barges have more than one capacity. The toxic substance within acts as the ballast to a floating neighborhood, which must be stabilized in a dynamic environment. The neighborhood is articulated as a collection of extruded wedges connected by structural keys and overwater pathways. These structures rise out of the water unequally, like the uneven protrusions of the rocky intertidal. The resulting variety of surfaces and planes interacts with the datum line of the ocean surface to create a complex, artificial landscape. This brutalist manifestation is necessary to house the permanent society of engineers, biologists, toxicologists, ecologists, and their families. There are a variety of social gathering places, interior and exterior, places to eat, places to be alone, and education facilities for children. But not every space is necessary immediately. This intervention facilitates a modular approach to construction on site, with more hexagonal modules being produced as the need for habitable space arises. This neighborhood is extensive, but not overly luxuriant for the success of a greater research initiative. These facilities are meant to be permanent habitation for permanent staff. The goal is to provide the infrastructure to sustain a culture and society of people with well-balanced lives where the opportunity to recreate facilitates a more positive experience in the workplace. All processes concerning the biological pump and plastic harvest are managed from an internal control room. This cathedral to the marriage of industry and ecology can be thought of as the brain of the intervention. An open format facilitates a democratic, collaborative, and informed approach to industrial systems, as the facility also serves as an office for researchers to compile and organize datasets taken from the surrounding ecosystem. Thus, they are able to evaluate successes and failures to justify proliferation. As a secondary goal, this intervention also provides a great opportunity to expand the human capacity to generally monitor the health of the ocean surface waters. Additionally, by acting as a surface base camp, this research station can help to facilitate further exploration and understanding of the vastness of the open ocean and its uncharted depths. The extractive economy of the continental shelf region of the ocean has a long history, but it is merely scratching the surface of the nutrient, mineral, and energy riches of the abyss. The extractive economy of the deep ocean and ocean floor is coming. In order to know how this will affect the ocean and humans, we need to encourage the development of this economy in a thoughtful and sustainable way. People need to take ownership and have accountability. Since the most visceral way humans know of taking ownership is the concept of home, the coupling of economy, exploration, research, and community makes a lot of sense. Another secondary goal of this project is to provide the infrastructure to maintain eco-oases throughout the intervention. Artificial natural communities grow within and on the architecture for the purpose of biophilic relief as well as ecological health. As this intervention grows industrially, so too do its biological components take on a life of their own. Coral reefs are planted interstitial to housing blocks on top of submerged surfaces and structural keys. Reef gabion panels are attached to these surfaces to provide adequate substrate for reef formation. A mild electric current encourages mineralization on the gabion wires and metal straps, producing the right conditions for an artificial reef. This primary production provides the complexity required for an ecosystem to develop. Gabion panels are also installed on top of the main office area, 150 feet below the surface where giant kelp is benthically attached. The primary production capacity of this species results in magnificent kelp forests, whose canopies provide the complexity of protective spaces necessary for many different types of fish habitats. This marine forest is visible from the office below, providing biophilic relief. But, more pragmatically, the fish that live in this habitat can be harvested for food. Contained within a centrally located aquarium glass sphere is an underwater terrestrial forest. This artificial landscape is maintained on terraced slabs and vertically connected by an encircling ramp. The space acts as an ambulatory refectory for the occupants of the structure, an experiential and mystical submersion that defies ecology. Occupying the sphere creates juxtaposition of ecotypes and is suggestive as human appropriation of all of Earth's ecosystems continues. It is also significant that this space exists at the center of the intervention, a metaphor for the significance of the human experience in our understanding of the universe. The architecture of this megastructure is therefore encouraging its occupants to consider the hyperobject of their own linear perceptions in the context of infinite hyperobjects. It is no secret that this intervention will be very, very large. Infrastructure stretches across almost 1 square kilometer of the ocean's surface. The biological pump is as tall as the Eiffel Tower, and, reaching deep into the ocean, tension cables attached to the seamount at a depth equivalent to the height of the Burj Khalifa. The amount of material required to construct such a behemoth approaches 1 million tons. I know that doesn't sound very environmentally friendly, but before drawing any hasty conclusions about this architecture's efficacy and environmental impact, let's talk about context. The epipelagic region of the ocean is vast and largely devoid of familiar context. The open ocean is so seemingly empty that it's almost understandable that megastructures could start to define such a placeless place. Currently, humans utilize the fabric of the ocean's surface as a highway for container ships, a pass-through of infinite vectors, but never as a place for permanent architectural intervention. However, humans have successfully colonized the shallowest regions of the ocean by engineering hyperobjects for the purpose of fossil fuel extraction. These architectures are ideally suited for their context, providing a useful precedent for this project. Offshore oil rigs are architectures unlike any other. Each intervention spans atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere, accessing mineral riches created over hundreds of millions of years, which, after refinement, can be distributed to a global economy. Thousands of these hyperobjects already exist, with more being built every year. But as governments consider their energy futures, such extractive fossil fuel infrastructure can and should be repurposed. Therefore, the hyperobject I have designed is modeled after and constructed of the skeletons of offshore oil rigs, limiting the investment capital needed to effect my proposal. In other words, to effectively solve problems that are massively distributed in space and time, a new generation of hyperobjects is synthesized from the components of pre-existing hyperobjects. Through these interventions, I believe it is possible to respectfully pioneer Earth's final frontier in order to facilitate more desirable nutrient and energy flows. If this project is successful, the materials and energy consumed to create these megastructures will be seen as insignificant compared to the global benefits attained, ecological health, and a greater understanding of the interconnectedness of our planet. We are all members of the ecological hyperobjects we inhabit. Despite previous efforts to be a scourge on the societies of life, I look forward to a creative future of problem-solving and integration. The urban ecologies and biological infrastructures that we will create defy the definitions of environmental science and architecture because they are not and have never been distinct. If we view architecture as a multidisciplinary experiment, if we view architecture as a hyperobject, we can begin to discover the hyperobject within. Because only by understanding our surroundings, our context, each other, and how we relate to one another can we truly understand ourselves.